Yeah, thank you so much once again. Thank you for joining our series of adaptation reporting under the enhanced transparency. And I would like to welcome you from the CBIT Global Support Program. We are happy that you are able to join us today. This is a series of webinar that we have planned for two networks, that is Eurasia and Anglophone Africa networks. Our series will be running from today, the 7th of May, tomorrow 8th and 9th, and then 10th, and then we shall have another session on the 28th of May. I would like to once again welcome you. As we wait for other colleagues to join, I would like to invite my colleague Seljana to introduce herself. I know she will also be taking on different sessions. As we wait for a few other colleagues to join, then we can start the session. And maybe before she introduces herself, I would like to request that we shall be recording this meeting. So I will start the recording. I'll start recording. So my colleague, you can just introduce yourself since we shall be moderating together, and then we can start the session.
Thank you, Sheila, very much. My name is Slađana Bundalo, and I'm a network coordinator of the Eurasia Transparency Network within the CBGSP program. And I'm also adaptation person and expert within the CBGSP program. So I'm very happy to share with you today this information about reporting adaptation through this recently used UNFCCC instruments, but also in the following days, I will share information and some guidance on adaptation reporting within the ETF Enhanced Transparency Framework, focusing on BTR or adaptation BTR part. So thank you, Sheila.
Yeah, thank you so much. So just a quick highlights about the different series. Our session 1 will be today, 7th May 2024, where we shall go through an overview of the existing arrangements and instruments for communication and reporting climate change impacts and adaptation under the Climate Change Convention and the Paris Agreement. And then session 2 will be on, which is tomorrow, will be we shall share the overview of the contents of the first 3 sections of the BTR, that is ABC, of the MPGs for adaptation component of the BTR, and it will provide guidance on how to report in the following areas. That is, for example, the national communications, the national action adaptation plans, and then the NDCs. And of course, we shall also look at areas of legal frameworks and institutional arrangements, impacts and risks and vulnerabilities, and as appropriate, and adaptation priorities and barriers. Our session 3 will be on 9th May, and it will be looking at the overview of how to report on adaptation actions covered in section D, E, and F of the adaptation component and of the BTR. It will provide guidance on how to report the following areas, that is also the national communication, NAPS, and the NDC. And then session 4, which will be on the 10th May, will also provide an overview of the remaining areas that are in the subsequent sections of the MPGs, that is G, H, and I, for adaptation component of the BTR. Examples also will be driven from national communication, NAPS, and NDCs. And then our last session will mainly be on sharing of countries' experience on current practices, challenges, and lessons learned for preparing information and reporting on climate change impacts. And the session will take place on the 28th of May. and we shall have different countries from different regions and networks sharing with us. So today's session, I would like to take you through the program where we shall be having, of course, I'll be moderating the session, but also we shall have opening remarks from our Global Support Program team. And then we shall have a group photo, and then we shall have session two, part of session one. Part two will be about a presentation on the introduction of adaptation reporting and BTR and function of different UNFCCC adaptation reporting instruments in the new ETF arrangement, which will be delivered by my colleague. And then we shall have question answer discussion, and then also reflection questions about the presentation. And then we shall have another presentation about expanding the purpose of adaptation reporting, why and how should countries report on adaptation. And then we shall have reflections, questions, but also have a quiz discussion, a quiz that will have a few questions to reflect on that section. Then we shall have a wrap-up session on close, and maybe we can also get closing remarks from one of you. And that's how today's program will run. So at this moment, I would like to invite our colleague, Madame Fatima Zahara from the Global Support Program, to deliver her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Thank you also, Slajana, for organizing this series, and to all the colleagues that have put a lot of work actually in organizing this series and preparing all the substantive material to it. So thank you very much for that. And dear colleagues, a very warm welcome to you to this first webinar of our adaptation reporting webinar series. As Sheila has mentioned, I'm Fatim Zahra Taibi. I'm the global coordinator of the CBIT Global Support Program, which is a global transparency project funded by GEF, implemented by UNEP, and executed by the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. So very warm greetings from Copenhagen. The program aims at supporting countries in their transparency efforts, particularly for the transition towards the new ETF and the biennial transparency reports. As you know, under the UNFCCC, all signatory countries are expected to report to a varying levels on the progress they are making towards realizing the goals of the agreements. And since 1994, countries have been reporting through national communications and later biennial reports for Annex 1 countries and biennial update reports, BURs, for non-Annex 1 countries. The focus of these reports have been mainly on inventories and mitigation. Nonetheless, countries have also reported on their vulnerability and adaptation efforts in their national communications. The Paris Agreement set a new reporting framework, the Enhanced Transparency Framework. Through this framework, reporting on inventories and progress in achieving the mitigation components of NDCs is mandatory. The ETF also provide for reporting for adaptation though this aspect is voluntary for all countries. However, with the increasing impact of climate change, the efforts consented mostly by developing countries who are most vulnerable to climate change became more significant. The need of reporting such efforts to highlight the contribution of developing countries to the goals of the Paris Agreement, and also to supply the UNFCCC with more in-depth information about adaptation needs, priorities, plans, and action under the Paris Agreement became critical. Therefore, the BTR, which is the main medium for reporting under the Paris Agreement, has expanded the reporting scope to encompass not only mitigation and inventories, but also, crucially, adaptation efforts in addition to support. As mentioned earlier, reporting on adaptation, though very important to developing countries, is non-mandatory. Therefore, with the non-mandatory nature of this reporting comes a little bit more of a vagueness in terms of the reporting provisions. Thus, at the heart of this webinar series lies a fundamental question. So how do we navigate this new area of adaptation reporting? This series seeks to provide comprehensive answers and guidance, drawing upon the guidance outlined in the modalities, procedures, and the guidelines, the MPGs, and also best practices from countries. Though through this series of 5 curated sessions, we will look at the adaptation reporting, beginning with an overview of the broader framework before delving into the specific thematic areas delineated in the MPGs, from national circumstances and legal frameworks to adaptation actions and cooperation. Each session will offer insights, practical guidance, and real-world examples to empower participants in the reporting endeavor. But beyond the dissemination of knowledge, we aim at fostering collaborations and exchange of best practices. This year, as you know, is very important for the climate agenda, as it will see the submission of the first ever BTRs early next year. The new NDCs are due by end of February. These two processes are closely interlinked, and I hope that with training like this, we can contribute to helping countries with their efforts in both the BTR reporting and the NDC update. I wish you a very fruitful and insightful webinar series, and thank you for your participation and active engagement in this series. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fatma Zahara, for very, very encouraging opening remarks. I would like at this juncture to ask or request participants to open their cameras so that we can take a photo. Kindly open your cameras so that you can take a photo. Kindly open your cameras so that you can take a photo. Yeah, thank you.
The first time we have this webinar for these two networks, so it's very nice to see colleagues from the two networks together. So very warm welcome again.
Yeah, thank you. So I will take the first photo. And then I will take the second photo. Yeah, thank you so much for this photo session. I would like to take this moment to now welcome my colleague Slajana to deliver the first presentation. But in the meantime, I will also put the registration link in the chat so that you can register along the way as we listen to her presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sheila, very much. So we will start with the presentation very soon. I will share my screen now along with this Sheila's link for the registration. Just a second, please. Can you see my screen? Yes, I will put now.
Yes, we can see it. We can see the screen, yes.
Full screen, thank you very much. So let's start with an introduction to adaptation reporting, and especially focusing on adaptation reporting within the BTR. So before start with the providing information, I just would like to say that this presentation is based mostly on the document named Reporting Adaptation through Biennial Transparency Report, practical explanation of the guidance that is published in 2020 under ICAT project, but also it passed 4 years, and there are some new insight and reflections that are incorporated in this presentation, but also just to announce that we are preparing a new guidance for the reporting of adaptation within the biennial transparency report. And as soon as we publish the new guidance, we will share with you. In meantime, this presentation and presentation on the following day of the following days will be posted at our climate transparency platform that I believe most of you are already aware of. So what we want to achieve with this presentation. The purpose of the presentation is to provide you with an overview of the system for communicating and reporting on adaptation under UNFCCC, to provide an introduction to the role of the biennial transparency report and its adaptation section in this system, but also to provide you an insight of the guidelines for reporting on adaptation in the biennial transparency report. So we aim to answer the following crucial questions, like what is the biennial transparency report and why it's relevant for reporting on adaptation? How countries actually report under UNFCCC by using the recently available instruments? What is the system for communicating and reporting on adaptation under Paris Agreement in general, and how the system under the Paris Agreement changed from the previous period? What is intention of the reporting of adaptation through BTR, as we call it now, adaptation BTR? And what areas do the guidelines for the adaptation BTR cover? So what is the biennial transparency report? In short, as many of you already know, and as the name suggests, the biennial transparency report is transparency-oriented report that has to be produced by countries every 2 years and submitted to UNFCCC. It represents a key component of the Paris Agreement transparency infrastructure called Enhanced Transparency Framework. In short, it's ETF, and the intention of the ETF is to enable COP to track progress towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, and along with the National Inventory Report and other new instruments introduced by ETF, the BTR's role within this framework is to make operational the transfer of the information from country parties to UNFCCC. So within the framework outlined by the ETF, the National Inventory Report will operationalize the transfer information about countries' GHG emissions. The BTR will operationalize the transfer of information about how countries are implementing the different aspects of the Paris Agreement through reporting on their climate actions across mitigation, adaptation, loss damage, and support needed and received. So the Enhanced Transparency Framework will come into force, as you all know, on the 31st December of 2024, and countries will be expected to submit their first biennial transparency report prior to this date. So when it occurs, ETF framework will formally replace the previous transparency arrangement under the convention, known as Monitor Review Verification System, or as we all know, MRV system. As a part of this transition, the Enhanced Transparency Framework will directly discontinue and replace certain aspects of MRV system. Among other areas, this will happen to the Monitor Review Verifications System infrastructure as biennial transparency report will replace both biennial report, BR, and biennial update report for Annex 1 and for non-Annex 1 parties, as you can see on the figure below. So the significance of this is that all parties now will use the same reporting instrument and guidelines from 2024 onwards. Also, it is important to mention that not all aspects of the previous arrangements, reporting arrangements, however, will be replaced. For example, national communications will continue to be active alongside with biennial transparency reports under the ETF. So the fact that the new reports under ETF framework will be applicable to both Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 parties makes a significant change from the previous system, in which Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 parties had different reporting responsibilities, which has also manifested in the two reporting formats. And another key difference between ETF and MRV systems is that enhanced transparency framework allows countries to report on adaptation actions and loss and damage through the adaptation section of biennial transparency report, which was not possible in the biennial report or biennial update report format, and now means that adaptation can be reported every 2 years. Previous to this, adaptation was only intended to report every 4 years via countries' national communications, as you all know and have already long experience in submitting national communications. So, how countries communicate and report under the UNFCCC? It was, yes, a long time ago, since 1994, countries have been systematically communicating and reporting to the UNFCCC on their national situation in regarding their GHG emissions, vulnerability to climate change, capacity needs, etc., etc., and about the actions they have taken to implement the convention, for example, how they are planning, implementing mitigation and adaptation actions, and providing support. The reasoning of providing this information has been, and is still is, to provide COP with the necessary inputs to assess the overall impact of the convention implementation. Also, these reports are vital means for exchanging information about how each country is implementing the convention. For example, information on what they are actually doing in combating with climate change, and for highlighting issues, problems, gaps, and constraints that countries are actually facing on that path. Following the Paris Agreement and its decisions, there are now 5 instruments available under the UNFCCC that countries can use to communicate and report on adaptation. And these are national communication, national adaptation plans, national determined contribution, adaptation communication, and at the end, new one, biennial transparency report. In addition to these, countries can also communicate on adaptation plans through unilateral instruments which are not associated with UNFCCC system. And the most significant of these are national adaptation plans, programs, or strategies, which are essentially the same as the NAPs, but implemented unilaterally. So, as you can see, there is now 5 instruments, and as a result of this is a potentially confusing mixture of different instruments which partially and sometimes significantly overlapping functions and mandates and information that they provide. This mixture of mishmash, however, can be framed and we call it like a loose system for communicating and reporting of adaptation. So what is the system for communicating and reporting on adaptation under Paris Agreement? The system under Paris Agreement refers to how the 5 adaptation relevant instruments loosely work together to facilitate transfer of information between countries and the UNFCCC. In order to understand how this system works, instruments can be divided in 2 broad groups, planning-oriented, which are NDC, SNAPs, equivalent national adaptation plans and strategies, adaptation communications, and reporting-oriented, which are national communications, BTRs, and again, adaptation communication, which we consider in both these categories. So distinction between planning-oriented and reporting-oriented instruments is based on whether an instrument's primarily function and goal is to communicate forward-looking information about countries' adaptation ambitions, priorities, and plans, or to provide backward-looking information about progress that country is making towards the adaptation goals or in implementing its adaptation plans and actions. So to try to visualize this difference between planning-oriented and reporting-oriented instruments, this figure shows how forward-looking information from the planning stages of the national adaptation process are documented in planning-oriented instruments. For example, how is documented assessment of vulnerabilities, setting adaptation priorities and targets, how countries deciding on adaptation efforts in their NDC, SNAPs, etc. And also shows how forward-looking information from these planning-oriented instruments later feeds into reporting-oriented instruments with information and is then updated by backward-facing information concerning how the implementation of these plans, strategies, etc. has gone. The figure also demonstrates how information from both types of instruments should feed in global stocktake and the next cycle of the adaptation planning. So in practice, classifying an instrument as simply planning or reporting oriented is not always like a clear cut, as most instruments tend to include both types of information. That can be explained by the fact that a robust planning process should consider the achievements and failures of previous planning cycles. And as such, it's not unusual for the results of the previous planning cycles to be included in new planning documents. Also, a coherent reporting on progress made and results achieved needs to refer to the plans and objectives that the actions being reported on were actually implemented against. As such, information about plans and objectives is often included actually in these reports. However, in some cases, these instruments are simply used differently by different countries. For example, national communications are also sometimes used to assess vulnerability and identify potential adaptation options, as well as to report on what has been implemented. So actually, they are not clearly or only reporting oriented. while also adaptation communications are apparently being used primarily for communicating plans by some countries and primarily for reporting purposes by some other countries. And that's why adaptation communication appears in both columns in the table below. So, while this means that there are a number of arrangements available, it seems that for the most countries, their system would look like something like you see on this slide. The figure illustrates the main flows of information between different planning and reporting-oriented instruments shown as on the left side of the figure, and main flows of information between the instruments used by countries and relevant UNFCCC processes used to review and analyze this information, which you can see on the right side on this figure. So, to start with the left side, far left, we can see on this figure that forward-looking information about countries' national adaptation process, for example, climate pledges and ambitions, vulnerability to climate change, adaptation needs, adaptation actions that they have planned. This information are generally found across their NDCs and national adaptation plans. Meanwhile, through the arrows moving from these instruments towards reporting-oriented instruments, on the center left on the figure, you can see this forward-looking information that should feed in either national communications, adaptation communications, or biannual transparency report, in which countries should be taking stock of their various adaptation goals, plans, actions, and providing backward-facing information that informs us about the progress that is being made and what the results of this progress has been. In this diagram, the reporting-oriented instruments are illustrated as being submitted together, something that is possible pardon, for countries to do when the submission deadlines of these reports overlap. While choosing to do this is up to the individual country, so you can choose depending on your circumstances or your decisions. And generally, we can say that this possibility represents an efficient means of streamlining one's reporting commitments for adaptation and beyond. In theory, information about progress and results should feedback in adaptation planning process, and therefore in the future planning-oriented instruments, as countries should be taking stock of what they have achieved and learned thus far, and adjusting their plans and strategies accordingly. When we move to the right side of the figure, we can see the various UNFCCC-driven processes that are relevant information about adaptation submitted by countries. These processes are divided in two groups, two types: review mechanisms located in the center of the figure and provisions for increased ambition and compliance far right on this figure. The right side of the figure demonstrates that there are relatively few UNFCCC processes that are applied to information about adaptation. For example, while much more information submitted by countries concerning their mitigation activities and GHG emissions has traditionally been reviewed extensively under the convention, as the opposite, information submitted about adaptation is only reviewed if it's included in the national communications of the Annex 1 countries. Meanwhile, of the mechanisms designed to increase ambition and compliance under Paris Agreement and the Convention, only the global stocktake really considers adaptation information. So what are the components of this system? At first, I will mention NDC. NDC is used to communicate countries' top-level ambitions and pledges, high-level goals, commitments to undertaken flagship actions. The NDC of developing countries often include information on implementation needs as well. Inclusion of the adaptation component in the NDC is actually voluntary. To different level, countries also include supplementary information that provides important background information about their national circumstances and vulnerability to climate change. So the next instrument, next report on adaptation is NAP, or National Adaptation Plans. This instrument is used to communicate the process and outputs of countries' NAP process to both domestic and international audiences. NAP process is UNFCCC endorsed and semi-structured adaptation planning process designed to assist less developed countries and other developing countries to formulate and implement strategic plans to meet their medium to long-term adaptation needs. And the NAP document, actual plan, is the output of this national adaptation planning process. So NAP as itself is a strategic planning document that describes countries' adaptation strategy, adaptation goals, priority areas, proposed and or planned actions, and the background context upon which the strategy is actually based, information about countries' national circumstances and results of assessments of countries' vulnerability to climate change, etc., etc. And it is generally expected that countries in the content of the NAP document should be strongly aligned with the NDC, with its priorities, goals, actions, and they in NDC should be the same and very similar to those underpinning the NAP. Information in NAP, however, is likely to be much more detailed than adaptation information in NDC, with vulnerabilities, priorities, actions described in more detail than in NDC, which is typically very brief and more, let's say, high-level document. Equivalent national adaptation plans and strategies, another instrument for reporting adaptation. Non-UNFCCC endorsed national adaptation plans and strategies are also strategic planning documents that perform largely the same role as UNFCCC endorsed NAPs. In other words, they are still strategic planning documents that describe countries' adaptation strategy and some plan. The only significant difference is that they are being conducted outside of the UNFCCC process. And usually these instruments are used by countries that are not targeted by NAP process, like developed countries or some LDCs, etc. So moving on the reporting-oriented instrument, and first one is national communications, well known to all of us. National communications were the original communication and reporting instrument under the UNFCCC, and initially they were designed as a means of capturing all activities under convention, including adaptation, of course. And there are two sets of the guidelines for preparing national communications for Annex 1 and for non-Annex 1 countries. and vulnerability and adaptation chapter is mandatory for those both these group of the countries. However, adaptation-related information required by both sets of the national communication guidelines is very similar, meaning that Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 national communication tend to contain similar information. Most often, that's about the country's exposure and vulnerability to climate change and their adaptation plans and actions that countries are implementing or planning. Additionally, to this non-Annex 1 countries' national communication often include information about proposed adaptation actions, which can be identified through vulnerability assessment, as well as gaps, challenges, barriers, and also capacity needs. It is important to mention that Decision 1 CP24 agreed in Katowice states that countries may submit their national communications and BTRs as combined report using the guidelines provided in the MPGs. In these combined reports, decision from Katowice stipulates that the areas of research and systematic observation and education, training, and public awareness that are not covered by the MPGs should be prepared according to the guidelines provided in Decision 6 CP25 and 70 CP8 as appropriate, which are actually guidelines for the preparation of the national communications. That's actually one indication that BTRs and NCs should be submitted together, and countries countries don't have to do that. It's not obligatory, but it's good opportunity to combine these two reports. So finally, biannual transparency reports. As the main reporting instrument under the Enhanced Transparency Framework, BTRs are considered as a reporting-oriented instrument, and there is actually clear overlap between functions of BTR and national communications. Also, there is a huge overlap between adaptation-focused guidelines for these two instruments, and countries that using both instruments will need to be careful to avoid duplicating efforts when submission deadlines for these instruments overlap. To continue with the BTR, even the adaptation reporting is voluntary. The guidelines for the BTR's adaptation section are significantly more detailed than they are for the national communications. For example, they include extensive guidelines relating to reporting on results of monitoring and evaluation of adaptation, and emphasize aspects of national adaptation process that possible missing from many national communications. For example, adaptation priorities, monitoring and evaluation, etc. Also, BTR requests information about how principles featured in COP decisions over the years have been integrated in planning and implementation processes. For example, stakeholder engagement, gender consideration, traditional knowledge, etc. And overall, it is anticipated that adaptation section of BTR will be more comprehensive than past or present national communications that countries submitted. So moving to the next reporting instrument, which is adaptation communication, or ADCOM. This instrument is established by Article 7 of the Paris Agreement with the official purpose to increase visibility and profile of adaptation and its balance with to make the balance with the mitigation, to strengthen adaptation actions and support for developing countries, also to provide input to the global stocktake and enhance learning and understanding of adaptation needs and actions. Also, the Paris Agreement states that adaptation communications shall be submitted as a component or in conjunction with other communications or documents, meaning that countries should submit an adaptation communication at the same time as part of another document, which sometimes can stating that another report represents one's country's adaptation communication. The Paris Agreement also stipulates that adaptation communication is not obligatory, meaning that countries are not obliged to submit one, and it's flexible and completely country-driven, meaning that countries are able to determine how to use it. In line with this, the guidelines for adaptation communication contains 9 general high-level elements that you can see on the left side of this slide. And these guidelines and elements are closely mirrored information requested by guidelines for the BTR. You can see here elements like national circumstances, institutional arrangements, impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities, national adaptation priorities, strategies, implementation of adaptation actions, plans, progress, results achieved, etc., etc. So in general, this suggests that adaptation communication is a reporting-oriented instrument. However, the use of the prefix may means that countries can pick and choose which elements they want to include in their adaptation communication, in their document, and on what way allowing the adaptation communication to use by a significant number of the ways. So far, the 64 countries have submitted their adaptation communications, and most of these were standalone reports. Some of the remaining were NDCs that were retrospectively assigned to be their adaptation communications, with a handful of NATCOMs and NAPs submitted as adaptation communications. In regard of adaptation communication, actually, countries have resubmitted their adaptation component of their NDC as adaptation communication. Also, they resubmitted their NAPs or equivalent documents as adaptation communication. And also, they resubmitted the vulnerability and adaptation chapter of their national communication as an adaptation communication. And at the end, some countries submitted a standalone reporting-oriented document as their adaptation communication. So while the figure on the left, we model the adaptation communication as a reporting-oriented instrument submitted together with or alongside with the BTR or national communication, it could be, in fact, be placed in conjunction with the NDC, NAP, or equivalent national adaptation strategy, or as standalone document. This depending on the preference of each country. So how the system under the Paris agreements has changed over the time. In terms of adaptation reporting, the new system coming into force in 2024 and represents quite significant step up from the previous system, while this is not the case for other topics under the convention, meaning mitigation and support provided, which are already reported biannually against enhanced standards via BRs or BURs. The new system for reporting adaptation oversees the introduction of two new instruments that provide flexibility with regards to how countries report adaptation, and a significant enhancement of its reporting guidelines. For example, the guidelines for the BTR are more complete and detailed for national communications and actually use the stronger language. Also, the new system provides opportunity to countries to increase frequency of adaptation reporting from once every 4 years through national communications to every 2 years through BTR. Despite this enhancement, reporting adaptation via BTR and or adaptation communication is still voluntary, meaning that countries can, if they wish, to continue to report on adaptation under previous system, for example, or to report only through national communication every 4 years using the previously provided guidelines for reporting adaptation within the national communication. So what is the introduction of the BTR intended to achieve? So what's intention here with the adaptation reporting? Clear vision of what reporting on adaptation through BTR is never explicitly spelled out by guidelines or decision resulting from the COPs. Conclusions towards what the adaptation BTR is intended to achieve can be found in the official purpose that is given for establishment of the ETF. In relation to adaptation, this purpose states that ETF is intended to provide a clear understanding of climate change action, including parties' adaptation actions, related good practice, priorities, needs, and gaps. And it also states that it's intended to inform global stocktake. This actually supports the conclusion that adaptation BTR is intended to have similar function to the adaptation chapter of national communication. So, for example, it means to provide snapshot of countries' national adaptation processes. And as you know, it should include information about countries' vulnerability to climate change, how it is how the countries are adapting to its vulnerability, and to state any adaptation needs or gaps that countries may have. This purpose is provided in decision 18 CMA1, and this decision also suggests that it is intended to contribute to collective pool of good practice and lessons learned in adaptation, also to facilitate recognition of adaptation efforts from developing countries, to contribute to the collective understanding of status of adaptation at the global and regional level. This all suggests that BTR intention is to facilitate reporting that's more comprehensive, more broad than it's presently submitted by using the presently available reporting tools, more complete with the greater level of details, and also enables the sharing of good practices, knowledge, and lessons learned. Both these notions are supported by the contents of the actual guidelines for the adaptation part of the BTR, which we will speak about in the next slides. So the overview of the guidelines for adaptation BTR. Before we start with this, before we see what information should be included in the adaptation BTR, it is important to stress that including an adaptation section in one's BTR is voluntary, and as such, all elements of the guidelines are also voluntary, meaning that countries are not obliged to include everything asked for the guidelines. This also means that the process of reporting on adaptation in adaptation BTR is an completely, entirely country-driven exercise, which countries therefore able to take whatever approach to reporting they desire, including what information they choose to include and how they choose to include different information. Also, it requests that do not use the prefix parties should, use the prefix parties may, which is less stringent and means that the request is considered as optional and not necessarily suggested. So what information is requested by guidelines for reporting of the adaptation part section of the BTR? Guidelines provided are divided in 9 sections from A to I, in which serve to divide many requests contained with the guidelines into in general areas of information. Titles of each section provide actually good indication of what kind of the information should be included in each section of the adaptation BTR. As expected, of course, the major share of the guidelines are focused on how countries should report on their national adaptation processes within the section from A to F. As you can see here, highlighted in red, which providing instructions on how countries should report on the provision of relevant background information on their national circumstances and climate change impacts, their experiences, on their adaptation priorities and barriers also to the adaptation, on their adaptation plans, policies, and actions, and finally to the progress made in implementing plans, policies, and actions and their outcomes and impacts. Alongside the guidelines for reporting on adaptation in section G, you can see here outlined in the green, contains guidelines that allow countries to report on loss and damage in their adaptation BTR if they want to do that. Meanwhile, section H, highlighted blue, signifies that adaptation BTR should also contain information about related activities that support adaptation. For example, guidelines with this section ask countries to report on international collaboration and networking events that the countries involved or already has attended, and on efforts to strengthen systematic observation systems and research related to adaptation. And at the end, finally, section I, highlighted in yellow here, does not concern any specific sub-area of adaptation or related subject, but instead allows countries to include any other information related to climate change impacts or adaptation, that information that otherwise is not covered by the guidelines.
Yes,
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I will just ask participants to mute their microphones so we can continue with this session. Thank you very much.
Yes. Hi.
Yes,
Thank you very
so
much.
How are you, sir? Yes. Yes.
You
Sir.
will allow me to first unmute
Sheila,
the
over to
participant.
you.
Thank God. How is it, sir?
It seems that participants
Okay.
muted their microphones.
Yes.
Sheila, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I hope you can hear me. That was very comprehensive presentation. And we have, before maybe we can get other questions, we have a question in the chat from Leo from Mauritius. The question is, what is comprehensive reporting on adaptation in the new format different from the previous reporting? What is the comprehensive reporting on adaptation in the new format different from the previous reporting? What type of additional information is needed in the new format? Yeah, that is the question. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sheila, and thank you for the question. Yes, the guidelines for adaptation of the BTR are requesting more comprehensive information about the adaptation reporting, and as we also through information that we have just shared with you, there is lots of information requested or asked in more details than in other reporting instruments. For instance, in previous period, the countries did not have opportunity and guidelines actually how to report on loss and damage. Even the many countries suffer and have information to share on that. So that is one section that is completely new. It was not covered by any other guidelines and any other sections of adaptation, even though not in national communications. Also, the information about processes of preparing national adaptation plans and adaptation processes in general, the new guidelines require more detailed information about these processes, specifically on how these information are defined, designed, collected, how the process went in the certain country, what are the results of the adaptation planning process, and what are results actually on the actual adaptation actions. So also additional more detailed information that can be, while as we said it's not obligatory, is information about how countries performing M&E on adaptation. So these are just a few of them. And in the next days, we will go more in deep in each section of the guidelines for reporting adaptation within the BTR. And then we'll mention and we'll speak about all these details. And also, again, I just will stress at the end that adaptation reporting with all these details is not necessary, but is very much welcomed and good for countries to communicate the adaptation efforts and their adaptation results, actually.
Thank you so much, Slajana, for that answer. So we have two more questions in the chat from Mr. Nkonde. Since reporting on adaptation or even submission of the adaptation communication is voluntary, how long can a country apply flexibility under the new ETF MPGs?
Yes, it is voluntary, and again, it's up to the country. So the flexibilities are generally here. Their purpose is to help countries to improve their reporting over the time. So if country cannot in the certain moment report on a certain issue related to adaptation, for instance, and also for mitigation, NTC, etc., the country is simply actually states what are the problems and what are the issues of reporting such information, what are the barriers, and actually provides information how do they plan to improve that kind of the reporting in the future. So the countries can make their own plans how to improve their reporting in the future. So stating in the next year, we will do this research and will be able to report, for instance, new information about our vulnerabilities or about our adaptation actions results. We are establishing monitoring and evaluation systems now. We are not able to report on that, but next year it will be operational and we will be able to report on that. So that's the flexibility that countries can use. And also there is no specific guidelines. It's up to every certain country to decide how to communicate that, which is mostly based on their capacities, internal capacities, of course, and etc. So I hope that I've answered the question.
Yes, thank you so much. I have two more questions, one more question in the chat, but participants, if you have any other question, you can just raise your hand and then you can ask. So the other question in the chat is about the review. Is the review of national communication for only Annex 1 in the new arrangement, and therefore the review of adaptation can only be in the BTR? So that is the question.
Technical review of the national communications with all its chapters is obligatory, while adaptation chapter, as is stated in the guidelines, is not obligatory, and also it's not obligatory for the technical review. So the only information on adaptation that goes through the technical review is consisted in national communications.
Thank you so much. I have another question. I think that was the other question is about, is there a difference between adaptation BRT and the normal BRT? Are they separate documents? I think it was part of the presentation for section 1.
I
think it was just that.
Sorry, I did not catch the question.
It could have been a typo in the presentation about a BRT, and then
the BTR consists on specific chapters dedicated specifically to the guidelines to the reporting of the adaptation. So we just call it adaptation BTR, but it is part actually of the full BTR.
So do we have any other questions from participants? Kindly feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. This was just introductory. We shall be going deep into the subject, so it would be very nice that we move together as we go into details of adaptation reporting. Wills, kindly unmute yourself and speak. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, hello,
I
we
just
can
wanted
hear
to know.
you.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that the fact that the BTR, there's another adaptation chapter, right? In the national communication, there's also another adaptation chapter. Now, if we are coming up with a modality where we combine, there's the BTR and plus the national communication. So are we going to have two chapters? BTR will have one on adaptation, and national communication will have another one on adaptation. How is it? How is the reporting going to be?
Thank you very much for your question. You know, the BTR is, as we already mentioned, BTR is a reporting-oriented instrument. And when submitting, national communications, you are submitting every 4 years, BTR every 2 years. So most of the information from national communications will be presented or communicated also through BTR. But in order to avoid burden, and also I will mention something on that in my next presentation, to avoid burden and repeating of same information, you can just simply state some key information about specific adaptation issues in your BTR, and then reference your national communications, make a link and reference national communications where you can speak more broadly about certain issues on adaptation. So it is important that both of these documents are published and publicly available. So I would say that information is in BTR is more comprehensive, but it's shorter, and provides info on specific results, specific more targeted information, while in your national communication you can inform audience more broadly about all issues, starting from national circumstances, etc., while in BTR you can just put the reference on the same chapter.
Okay, thank you so much. I hope it was answered. I can see a hand up, but also I can see someone who unmuted themselves. Maybe Kesiwe, you can go ahead and speak.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Slajana. I just wanted to add to the response from Slajana, Wheels, that as you have seen that you have to submit the BTR every 2 years, and then you have to submit a national communication every 4 years. So at some point, you will have to submit these two documents together. So based on the MPGs, the country can submit one document, and in the BTR, you include the other elements that are not part of the BTR reporting, which is mostly the other information, relevant information that is required for countries to actually implement the convention, which is speaking to public awareness, capacity building, and systematic observation and research. So these you can submit as an annex of your BTR, and then communicate that your BTR contains information for reporting under the Paris Agreement and also under the convention as a national communication. And then you have the additional information as an annex. So this is the leeway that the guidelines allow countries to actually package this information instead of duplicating and having two documents in the year where you have to submit your national communication and your BTR. You can actually submit one document. And also just to emphasize that these documents, basically, it's at the country's discretion how you want to package the information. So for instance, if a country in the same year is also submitting, decides that they don't want to include adaptation in the BTR, but they will communicate an adaptation communication, you reference that for your adaptation, you have communicated in an adaptation communication, and you can use the same information to say this is also linked to your national communication. So this is just a matter of packaging and also avoiding that the countries, there's a lot of burden in terms of putting this information and packaging it in different reports. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kesue, for that elaboration on the combined BTR and national communication. I think in our last webinar, it came out as one of the main questions. And I think as we go deep in the subject, in the different sections of the BTR for adaptation, it will be more clear on what information you can put and how easy it can be for the country. But as we are all aware, it's about the country's discretion, then it will make it more easy for countries to make a decision. And as part of the planning process for BTR preparation, it is always very important for countries like the adaptation team to sit and agree on the scope of adaptation reporting so that it's a clear plan on how they will over time report on adaptation. So that kind of planning for the different teams for the BTR sections is very important. And then it can also help them to elaborate more on the guidelines and understand them as they plan to do the reporting. So it is very important. So I don't know if we have another question, but if we don't have another question from the participants, I would like to just share with you some of the questions that can help us to reflect. As you may be aware, that adaptation reporting is not mandatory, but it would be very important for us to kind of reflect together on how do we think we can do this reporting. These are reflection questions. Sorry. I hope you can see my presentation. These are reflection questions. And I hope you can all see them. So one of the question is what your country would like to achieve through adaptation reporting. So what would your country like to achieve through adaptation reporting? So as adaptation teams, these are some of the reflection questions. And of course, if you have an answer, you could just put it in the chat so that countries can also learn from you. This is a learning process for most of the countries. And then question 2 is, what would be the optimal combination of UNFCCC instruments for reporting adaptation? Yes, what would be the optimal combination of UNFCCC instruments for reporting adaptation? From the presentation, we have seen several instruments, so it would also be very important for countries to reflect and understand some of these instruments as they plan to report on adaptation. And then, how much do your countries want to report on adaptation? Is that a political decision, or usually it is about the technical decision? So some of these reflection questions, if you can just type your views in the chat, it would be make it more interesting in terms of learning and how other countries are planning to do this. But also, if countries have not yet started reflecting, it would be very important that they start asking themselves questions on how they think the scope of adaptation can be in terms of some of these questions. So as we continue with our session, if we don't have any other questions, or if you can also maybe provide your reflection on the question, but if we don't have any reflections in the chats, I will request that we continue with our program for today, and we are going to be receiving from the next part of the presentation on expanding the purpose of adaptation reporting. Why and how should countries report adaptation? So I will hand over this part to my colleague Slajana to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm going to share my presentation again. Maybe just to start also with some questions for you. since we went through all adaptation reporting instruments available under UNFCCC, and my question would be simply, what of these instruments does your country use or will use to communicate? I know that most of the countries use national communications, but you can also put in the chat what other instruments does your country use to report adaptation adaptation information of your country. You can see here options that we speak about earlier: national communications, national adaptation plans, nationally determined contributions, adaptation communications, biannual transparency report, and maybe all of above. So let's move to the next presentation on expanding the purpose of the adaptation reporting, which will also mention some information that you asked minutes before. So with this presentation, we would like to expand information on the relevance and reach of adaptation reporting, to note some trade-offs between comprehensiveness and depth, and usableness, sorry, and the viability of national reports, and to present some ideas and mechanisms for reducing duplication of efforts and unnecessary burdens associated with adaptation reporting. So, as mentioned in the last presentation, the general idea behind reporting on adaptation under the UNFCCC is to inform COP negotiations and associated process about how the reporting country is vulnerable to climate change, where the reporting country wants to be in relation to its vulnerability to climate change. What is the vision? What are the priority areas, goals, and targets? What are the reporting country has done or is planning to do to achieve this vision, to address these priority areas and reach goals and targets? What progress the country has made so far? What challenges, barriers, and gaps country is facing, and what support needs it has? So while the UNFCCC and parties to the convention are clearly the main target, our audience for all these reports, prominent national reports that are publicly available, these documents can be used as mechanism for clearly communication of this information to a wide range of other stakeholders. Stakeholders that could be informed through these reports include a range of domestic and international stakeholders, as you can see here. As domestic, we can see all levels of the national governments, local level, national ministries, local, national NGOs and civil society groups, academia, private sector, media, general public. As of international stakeholders, and the public for these reports, we see other countries, UNFCCC and parties, other countries in sense of the their donor capacities, multilateral donors like GCF, JEF, etc., international non-government organization, international partners, for project implementation, for instance, academia research, and also very important private sector. So whether or not a country aims to take advantage of this, or it is, of course, need to be self-determined. For countries that see value in this, leveraging reporting documents such as national communications and BTRs as mechanisms for communicating with other audiences will mean actively tailoring the content's depth focus of these reports to match the informational needs of the target stakeholder groups. This is actually completely possible within the framework provided by the various guidelines for the national communication, BTR, and the adaptation communications, as these guidelines for these instruments do not tell countries how to include this information, and doing so would not change substantive content addressed by the report. For example, the reports would still provide information about vulnerability, adaptation processes, support needs, etc., etc. Further, to a certain extent, national reports submitted to UNFCCC will enlarge these stakeholders regardless of whether they are considered during its preparation, simply because they are high profile and these documents are publicly available. So countries wishing to leverage these reports in this manner have to consider which other stakeholders are we interested in engaging with this report, and what information do we want to provide them with. It is also countries need to consider, is it relevant information about the subject area, theme, or sector available, or when addressing this area, are we providing enough detail and clarity about the topic to meet the informational needs of these stakeholders that we involve in the process. So, for example, what we mean here, if country wishes to demonstrate that they are prioritizing and addressing the needs of vulnerable groups, women, minorities, indigenous people, etc., it would be beneficial for them to include descriptive information about what the government's ambitions are in the policy in this area and what's being done to realize these ambitions. How are gender considerations systematically being integrated into adaptation planning, for example? Likewise, clearly and comprehensively articulating specific vulnerabilities, adaptation priorities and support needs in a highly visible public document such as national communication or BTR is likely to provide your country with stronger starting point for negotiations with multilateral and bilateral donors. It could also provide other actors within your government, for instance, staff from line ministries, subnational and local government, non-state actors, with a stronger starting point to develop and implement relevant policies and actions and mainstream adaptation consideration in their existing decision-making processes. So in addition to this, as mentioned in a previous presentation, reporting on adaptation also has a potential additional important role in contributing to the collective pool of knowledge and good practice regarding adaptation actions and approaches, facilitating recognition of adaptation by developing countries, and furthering other collective understanding of the status of the adaptation of the global and at the also regional levels. Very similar, countries wishing to use adaptation reporting to realize any of these possibilities would need to consider this as their scope and during the preparation actually of their reports. For example, countries wishing to communicate good practice experiences that they had in their adaptation processes, lessons learned on adaptation actions, policies, and approaches, should need consider which good practice lessons learned are priority for them to communicate, And if the information being provided is sufficiently clear, detailed and complete for relevant readers to be informed enough or to be inspired or to act upon they receive that information. So while we have stated that reporting on adaptation via BTR is intended to be more comprehensive than reporting that's generally been done through national communication to date. It's intended to facilitate sharing of lessons learned and good practices, and can be utilized to communicate with a range of different stakeholders outside of the UNFCCC processes. Among other things, this is clearly trade-off to be made within when preparing these reports, as the report cannot be all things at all times. So further, even if it could, it's likely that report would be too heavy and to be useful to most, if not all, readers. So you have to be careful when choosing information to report. Also, there are clearly issues relating on how viable is it to try to achieve everything possible through reporting given resources constraints that all countries have more or less that have. And as such, when producing your reports, countries will be tasked with balancing with what they want their reports to achieve. For instance, the level of information they want to contain and key messages they want to communicate with their audience against what is possible to provide given the national resources that countries have. Finally, I would like to talk about some mechanisms for to reduce duplication of effort and undue burdens for the majority of the countries. Reporting via every available reporting-oriented instrument separately, for example, through national communication, adaptation communication, BTR, to the full extent of the guidelines provided for this instrument, will be a significant burden that has a relevant and relatively little purpose or little payoff. For example, undue burden. As such, where appropriate, countries can reduce this burden by taking advantage of significant and obvious synergies between all these instruments. The most obvious means of doing this would be to combine reports when their submission timelines align. So to submit one report that serves as two or more instruments, as we mentioned previously. For example, countries can submit and combine report that constitutes their national communication and BTR, national communication and adaptation communication, BTR and adaptation communication, national communication, BTR, and adaptation communication. So here are some 4 options. For national communications and the BTRs, this should be happens theoretically once every 4 years, and combined submissions, including the adaptation communication. However, that will depend on how country chooses to use its adaptation communication and when it decides to submit it. So the cross-analysis of the guidelines for all these instruments for the reporting adaptation, meaning national communication, adaptation communication, BTR, that is conducted by Adaptation Committee in 2019, shows that significant overlaps in the adaptation relevant guidelines for these instruments. So this analysis shows that countries looking to combine reporting requirements should use the guidelines for the BTR as their starting point, since these guidelines have the greatest coverage across all relevant areas of information, as you can see on this figure. In fact, the only things missing according to this analysis are guidelines for providing information about implementation and support needs of developing countries, and guidelines for providing information about how adaptation action is contributing to the objectives of the other international frameworks like SDGs, Sendai framework, etc. So countries that want to include this information in combined reports would need to report on these areas using the relevant guidelines for the other instruments. In the case of two areas that I've just mentioned, this would be guidelines for adaptation communication. So other means for streamlining adaptation reporting would be to take advantage of the provision included in Enhanced Transparency Framework that enables countries to cross-reference previously reported information and focus its reporting on updates to previously reported information. Under ETF, this provision is only applicable to information related to adaptation. However, it is significant as it provides countries with one very effective means of reducing the quantity of information that they actually need to include in their BTR document without necessarily leading to the information to be lost. Cross-references would most obviously apply to the previous UNFCCC reports and could be used, for example, to refer to the results of the climate change projections or vulnerability assessment in previous reports, for example, in national communications, when these projections and assessments still represent latest projections and assessments available to the reporting country. So the country did not perform any additional research or analysis, so that's it. In other words, they have not been updated since the national communication in question was published. However, there is no reason why countries cannot also use cross-references more generally through hyperlinks to direct readers to other documents and resources that contain additional or relevant information that is not included in main report. So you can use also hyperlinks. In fact, this possibility may represent a very efficient means of providing certain stakeholders with special information that may be too long or technical to include actually in your main document. However, for this to work well in practice, the resources that readers are directed to will need to be in the same language as the original report, or in language that is understandable by the intended audience, and online and publicly available, which is very important. Countries utilizing these options should be aware that not everyone, even those who should be interested in additional information, will click on these links. As such, some impact will be lost by including information like this. So to mitigate these risks, authors can clearly describe what information can be found in this external document or information under hyperlink that country has provided. So thank you very much. In addition to this, maybe to start with some discussion with you on your specific adaptation reports and plans, I would like to ask you the following questions. So what is the situation in your country? We know all that UNFCCC and parties of the convention are main target audience for all these adaptation information reports. Which others do, my question is, which other stakeholders groups would your country be interested in communicating with through their adaptation reporting? So what other audience of your adaptation reporting would be potentially will be in your country? So here are the options that we talked during the presentation: all levels of government, domestic NGOs and civil society groups, academia, private sector, maybe multilateral donors, international donors, NGOs, and all of above. So please feel free to discuss on this, to share your intentions or your plans in regard of the target audience of your adaptation reports. I will stop sharing now my presentation and stop here and ask Sheila to kindly continue this discussion.
Yeah, thank you so
course,
much.
if you have, sorry, of course, if you have a question, you please feel free, of course, to ask. Sheila, over to you now.
Thank you. So I would like to thank you for still a detailed elaboration of the different elements in the MPGs on the adaptation reporting. And I think it's becoming clearer and clearer as we are going in the different sections of the MPGs. So just as part of the reflection, if you have any questions, kindly feel free to ask, or if you have any contributions and all reflections you think that as countries we try to prepare the BTR, your thoughts. It would be very interesting to understand that you are working with us and that you are moving with us in the preparation of the BTR reporting. So I will also be sharing my presentation on the slide on the second part of the reflection questions, but just I would like you to kindly request you to fill the form for registration. We are going to use it throughout the week, so it's just one-time filling. Today I can see that you are mainly over 50, but I have already received only 16. I appreciate. So I will still request that you can register. It's one-time registration throughout the series of our webinars. So it would be very nice that we have you on record so that we can be able to share more documents on adaptation reporting. And of course, it is very important as we try now to create our communities of practice for the different elements. And one of our focus community of practice will be adaptation. So it would be nice to have proper record of people who are focused on adaptation. So that's why we are kindly requesting that you fill the registration. Thank you. So part two of the reflection questions is the first question is, what are the arrangements in your country for adaptation related reporting? Yes, and then what approach does your country take to cover the multiple arrangements? Could you share what works and doesn't work in responding to multiple arrangements of reporting? It would be nice for this part of questions to really hear from you. Please feel free to put up your hand and share your views on what you think about these questions. It would be nice to really hear from you. Kindly unmute yourselves or put up your hand, or you can put something in the chat We are waiting to hear from you so we can know that we are not speaking to ourselves. Yeah, thank you. I'll give you a few minutes. Yeah. Rudy, kindly unmute yourself and speak. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation. I'm Rudy from Mauritius, Department of Climate Change. So my question would be with respect to the NDC. So we have reported an adaptation in our NDC, and we know that the NDC also follow a cycle of 5 years where we need to update and submit and be more ambitious. But in our NDC, we've committed for 35% unconditional and the rest, 65% conditional. So what we would like to convey is that as a SIDS, so we need those additional means for us to fulfill our what we've committed in terms of adaptation. So what would be the best strategy? Should we again include it in our NDC and then reflect it in the BTR and the national communication? So I would like to hear from you on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very, very interesting question. Yes, we are all about asking ourselves on reporting and actually setting our goals within the NDC. And as we know, the adaptation chapter is not obligatory also for NDC, but countries include, and it's how to say. It's recommended to involve adaptation, since adaptation is somehow in previous reports and goals and targets has been a bit neglected. So even though it's a very, very important area, and people and countries are very much suffer from the negative climate impacts, but also they are doing a lot of things, actions, plans, strategies, and specific activities in their countries in order to reduce negative impacts of climate change in context of the adaptation. So from the practice, some countries included some, I would say, big and maybe hardly achievable adaptation goals in their NDC. And I see adaptation communication within the NDC as something that's realistically achievable in the 5 years period of the upgraded or revised NDC. So when communicated your goals and targets, your adaptation goals and targets, I would recommend to be realistic. Yes, you have your national adaptation plans, which are stating some actions or plans of actions in mid or longer term. But when speak on NDC, period is very short. In order to implement adaptation actions and strategies, it's a very complex activity, and it cannot be done like overnight. So time is needed for each of these activities. So just be realistic. And for some countries I know, for instance, they have just one adaptation goal in their NDC, for instance, for the next 5 years period to establish the M&E framework for adaptation. So they are considered according to their capacities, that they will be able to do that in the next 5 years. So I think that's completely okay. Yes, you can state more goals, and you can refer to your documents, and probably this information will come from your national adaptation plans, national adaptation strategies. But also, yes, take in consideration the time frame for the NDC implementation, and put your realistic goals for adaptation. I hope that
Yes.
I've answered your question.
Yes, we shall actually go deeper into that when I understand that it's almost due for countries to review their NDC, so it will also help for countries to reflect on the realistic now targets from the previous set targets. So it will give a clear direction, since now there will be more understanding, especially on the requirements of the in the MPGs. So it will help countries to reflect more on the targets, and maybe they can also consider having more realistic indicators for adaptation to enable tracking. Yeah. We have a question in the chat. Is there a reporting time frame for the information, e.g. information for past 2 years or since the last reporting? And then the next question is about, in case where a country was unable to report in one reporting period, where should the next reporting period start? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. For the adaptation reporting, you use the last information that you have. For instance, the most information you will source from your national communication. For instance, vulnerability risk assessment, your national circumstances, etc., since maybe that's the last updated information about your country situation. However, if you have performed new research, or you have developed new report with revised information, of course, that you will cover that period, new period. If you reflect to the previous national communication, which is still, active, you don't have a new national communication submitted, so you will use that period for your adaptation reporting. That will be reference period for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think this was very good that we are able to get some insights on the reflection questions. So if we don't have any other questions or needs for clarification, I will allow me to go to the next session. Our next session is a quiz. We shall have a quiz, and with our quiz, we are using Menti, and I will request participants to download the Menti on their computers. So www.menti. I will be putting on the. I will be sharing my screen and also showing the instruction. So you will let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Sorry. It's moving. So this is the Menti instructions. I will request participants to download the Menti or to join. Just put in your Google and put www.menti.com, and our code is 89261045, or you can say 89261045 or 89261045. So kindly download the Menti so we can start our quiz. It's just part of the reflection, part of what we have learned. And we hope that the next series will be more interesting. There will be more learning, and we really appreciate that you have been able to join in and participate in this Menti. It was so interactive. So kindly download. We are getting to the end of today's session. I can see we have 3 players. It would be more interesting if we have maybe more players. I'll be a little patient to wait for you so that we can have more people joining our quiz today. It is part of the reflection. I can see only 3 people at the moment. Kindly go to Menti, www.menti.com, and then enter the code to be part of the players. The code is 8926 1045. I can put the same code in the chat. Yeah, thank you for joining. For those who have been able to join. I'm putting the code in the chat. Kindly see in the chat, there is a code for Menti. It would be nice that you join. I can see only 5 players. We are over 50 people. At least let's be more than 10 so that it can make learning more interesting. Kindly join the Menti. Yes, thank you so much for joining. I can see 6 players in the chat, on the Menti. Thank you for joining. The code is 8926 1045. Thank you for joining. Maybe let me play with the 6 that I already joined. Maybe next time we shall have more players. Thank you.
So
And please,
let's
if
see
you
what
have
we
any,
have learned.
Yeah. But maybe if you have any challenges of joining, you can also let us know so that maybe we improve our services. So that's why we are trying to use some of these technologies so that it's part of capacity building and learning and making learning interesting, especially for our BTR reporting. So I will start the questions. So as you can see, we have 21 players now. Thank you so much for joining. So I'm going to run our first question. Our first question is coming, and it is asking, the question is saying, when did countries start to systematically report to UNFCCC regarding their national climate situation? We have 30 seconds to answer, and let's see how it goes. When did countries start to systematically report to the UNFCCC regarding their national climate situation? We just have 1 minute left, yeah. So thank you so much. We have 8 people. We started 1994, and I hope now all of us have known that. So let's go to our board and we see how we are scoring. So we have different players. Those who were first got more points. So we are going to go to our next question. We have, thank you so much for joining. I can see we are now 26 players. And I will go ahead and enter to get the question. And all who will answer questions correctly, they will get maximum points. So our question number 2 is, what were the first climate reports countries submitted to the UNFCCC? I will repeat the question. We have 30 seconds. What were the first climate reports countries submitted to UNFCCC? We already have 11 players answering. Thank you for answering the question. Just a few minutes here, we have only 18, 19. Yeah, we had 19 players, and at least most of them, 15 out of 19, know that we submitted national communications as our first reports to the UNFCCC. So let's see the score. Yes, we have Butcher McBoatface. He's still taking the lead, and with colleagues. Yeah, we can see like 6 people are taking the lead. Let's go to the last question. Kindly join and be part of the game. 24 players ready. So this is our last question. Yeah, we have 25 players ready. Yeah, thank you. So those who will answer correctly, they will get maximum points. Our last question, we have 30 seconds. Which instruments available under the UNFCCC can countries use to communicate or report on adaptation? Yes, from the presentation, we had many instruments, but we would want to understand if you still reflect and you can know them. Which instruments are available under the UNFCCC can countries use to communicate or report adaptation? We have 19 players ready. And let's see. Wow, so all the above. So we have 7 people who have passed the question. Yeah, thank you so much. And this was our last question. And we can see Mark Boatface is still taking lead with his colleagues. Yeah. Yes, the 3 are taking the lead. Thank you so much, Caspar, Tiger Baby, and Mark Boatface for winning this quiz for today. We hope to learn more in our next quizzes for the next Menti sessions. And I would like to thank you for participating in this quiz. I hope next time it will be more interesting, all of us to have key learning points from our webinar sessions. So as we are winding up in this session, I would like to request one of you to give us closing remarks, but just to let you know that tomorrow we shall still have a 2-hour session of our webinar session, and we hope that you will be able to join. We are going to be using the same link for all the sessions, and I'm sorry, I apologize. I think we had another link because of Teams. When we send separately, sometimes it brings another link, but we are going to be using this same link, and we shall be sharing all our recordings and also the presentations that we are sharing during the webinar. So stay tuned to our climate change platform during this series, that every session we shall be finalizing, we shall be sharing the presentation. So I will request that one of you give us closing remarks for today, or if we have any comments, but still I did not see many of you register. It would be nice that we have many of you register. I have only 21 and yet we are over 50. It would be nice we have a record from you so that it's easy for us to communicate to you. As you may be aware, these are 2 different networks, so we would want to have a separation. So if we have from the participants list here, if you don't register, it would be difficult for us to know where you joined us from. So we are kindly requesting that it would be nice that you actually register so that we are able to follow up with you through our different networks. So I'm waiting for one of you to give us closing remarks for today so that we can wrap up our session for today. Yeah. We are waiting. I can see someone is talking, but we cannot hear you. Mr. Samuel, kindly unmute yourself.
Yeah, good evening. Is it good afternoon, everyone? Thank you very much, Shira, for organizing this this webinar. I think it was quite it was quite good, and that's also made me just thank Sajana. Is it Sarajana for making that wonderful presentation? Thank you very much. I think it was quite insightful. We were able to at least to pick up 1, 2, 3 things here, and I think is again it is something that is quite good, so that at least we can be the know-how of what is expected. I know we are trying to struggle to ensure that we can be able to report, because of course coming next year and is in the end of this year, most of the countries will be now still be an obligation for us to do the reporting. Although probably you have said that the adaptation is not, of course, mandatory that we need to report. I think it is also good. It's good, at least we should really need to understand it. so that we can be able to ensure that we can be able to highlight some of the key things probably we feel that we need to get into the reports for the purpose that you have highlighted. And I think it was, you have really elaborated why it is necessary for us to do that, especially the developing countries. And therefore, I think it is insightful that we have at least gotten that information. And therefore, I think, yes, as Sheila, you have done it, I think it is quite good that we have these sessions so that at least it becomes clearer and for us to be able to really understand. It will be easier for us when it comes now to the actual reporting. I know as a country, we have started now with the adaptation communication, which probably we use as a vehicle for the adaptation. But of course, we also want to see our reports, adaptation reports, going into the other report for the purpose of ensuring that once the information is there, anyone can be able to pick up the information, and where probably support, we can be able to get the support they are probably needed, or any maybe something, any information that may be useful to the relevant institution, especially the financial mechanism. Therefore, I think from our end, or from on behalf of the participants, I just want again to say thank you very much for arranging this. Probably I'm not very sure that the 2 hours, okay, keeping on the program or on the webinar for 2 hours is a little bit longer, but I think anyway, still doable. Probably we'll try maybe to join, but although probably continuously for the 5 days, it's going to be maybe a little bit difficult, but I hope we'll be able to be there for the webinar. And therefore, just finally, just to say thank you very much, and we really love this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye. I saw David's hand. He came at the same time. Maybe he wants to say something small, then we can close. Since it's 2 hours, we don't want to really exceed the time. So David, just something, and then we can close.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. Thanks to CBIT. I think I would say yes, it's supposed to have this webinar because it's quite important. Many of us actually was kind of like confused. Now there's a bit of clarity on what exactly what needs to be done. I hope that tomorrow, I think tomorrow's going to be more interesting, given that tomorrow we're going into details of what reports will require. Looking at the concept that was shared and the program that was shared for tomorrow. So thanks so much to CBIT. Really appreciate it. This will help you in conflict capacity. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much from our side. We appreciate your attendance and we hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you. All the recordings will be shared for each session so that you are able to do self-learning. We appreciate. Bye-bye from me and my colleagues. Yeah, bye.
Goodbye to all and see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.